Welcome to How Ecology Works. In this podcast, we cover all topics in ecology and how you might apply them in your future career. Hey everybody, welcome back to How Ecology Works. Today we've got a really interesting episode. We have Candra Burns here, who is going to talk to us about something that is close to home, quite literally. We're going to talk about the eruption at Mount St. Helens, and also about how earthquakes and volcanoes and those types of disturbances can affect community succession. So, Candra, please tell us about what you've learned over the years.
So I grew up in Washington State, and I was always curious about the Cascade Range. I grew up just south of the Olympic National Park, and that is a separate range from the Cascades. However, the peninsula of the Olympics is up to the west, and there's kind of a buffer zone of the I-5 corridor that goes between the two. And then you have the Cascade Range. And I was always curious growing up why they would show us VHS tapes of Mount St. Helens eruption. And I got so many classes on this and had so many tapes showed to me that I felt like I was there in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk all over the world, and some people are like, oh, I don't even remember what year it was. And each person, when we have these defining moments in our lives, have different experiences and stories to tell. But I got really lucky when I was studying disturbance ecology at Evergreen State College in 2012. I actually got to go out with the lead ecologist, and I was going to discuss that with you guys today, because it's a really important topic to learn about the volcanoes and earthquakes. And whenever I fly in and out of Seattle, I always in the airplane go, oh, there's a stratovolcano that can erupt at any time. And people get on the edge of their seats like, really? Yes,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, really. And earthquakes are happening all the time.
Yeah, that's really cool, and something that I don't think about that often, but it's really fun to think about it. I give the examples when I'm teaching about succession of primary succession, which the classic example is from volcanoes. Please tell us what you learned about it.
So that has been interesting. I'm going to start with volcano types and then move into earthquakes and then move into the succession last. And primary succession is in the national park, and then reforestation was done on the edge in private lands. So there's very
cool.
stark difference on the way that the land was managed or not. So in my notes, I wanted to talk about volcanoes first because they are filled with magma chambers underneath active volcanoes. They will move upwards and they can release violently, which is the explosive eruption that most people know of, the Mount St. Helens eruption. So Mount St. Helens erupted May 18th, 1980. And it's been so many years. And if you are very local to the area of the Toutle River or in Klamath Falls, you had a different experience than people in Spokane, Washington, or Idaho, Oregon. We all felt it in different ways. And I was on the West Coast in Aberdeen, Washington, but I wasn't alive for the experience. I've just experienced it through others and all of their stories. And so that's something that I wanted to discuss with you, that this Cascade Range is stratovolcanoes that are active at all times. And they were always having earthquakes. So the reason why it gets so explosive is because of the gases that build up in this magma chamber. The viscosity of magma is important because it builds up, and it depends on the bulge that is created and the landslides and the eruptions that happen. So lava flows are well known, and lahar flows are also well known in these types of eruptions.
So did you say lahar? Could you spell that?
Yes. So lahar is spelt Lahar, and it's also known as a debris flow as well. But lahar is a mix of debris and magma.
Okay. I wasn't familiar with that term. So very
Yeah,
interesting. Go ahead.
learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, so this is another thing I should tell you guys is that this is also known as a metamorphic process. And it's metamorphic because it is a literal explosion of gases, minerals, and debris. And what happens is freezing and cooling, and the rocks that come out of this are mostly known as pumice.
Okay. Pumice.
So
Cool.
yeah, and I have a few of them with me, and it's absolutely just an honor to have those um, from these flows. So lava flows are known really in Hawaii. Hawaii
Hmm.
is made up of lava flows, and it flows as we're speaking. So
Yeah.
the island is made up of lava, and lava is magma. It's very, very hot, and it is a different material. It's not like the explosion that we just discussed, and it's not
Hmm.
going to create the pumice that we discussed because it doesn't have the gases, and it's not explosive either. It's just
Hmm.
it's a flow,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So there, these volcanoes are made up of cinder cones, shields, composite minerals, and there's also cryptic volcanoes, which have a bulge, a slide, and a big boom. And so the cryptovolcano is, I think, what we know now in Mount St. Helens, because the bulge that used to be there is no longer, but it's rebuilding. And a part of Mount St. Helens actually slid off.
So in that process that you said just then that it's building, does that mean that it's essentially getting pressurized and going to blow again at some
Correct.
point?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes, they can erupt again. And so now, modern day, if you fly over Mount St. Helens and start to see this bulge that we just discussed, it's no longer a cone like
Hmm.
structure. And so half of the face is gone. And what we're seeing now is another bulge creating to just restart the process.
Hmm.
So we need to always be thinking about these things. So how do these eruptions come and why do they happen? Well, there's constantly earthquakes from divergent plates, convergent plates, and subduction zones.
Interesting.
So, subduction zones are in the oceanic crust and they are more dense than the Earth's surface.
Wow.
So, when these zones, convergent and divergent, so when they're bending and coming together, they are diverging and converging. So, convex
Hmm.
is down and diverging is up. And that is what is going on right now in all of the volcanoes of the earth and why land is
Hmm.
created. The Olympic National Park is actually that process of subduction, and it's happening. It is rising and falling and rising and falling and rising and falling. And we see it as a recreational thing where we're hiking, but we don't think
Hmm.
of that rising and falling because it's so minuscule in the human mind. But
Right.
geologic processes take thousands of years.
Right. And in our scale of perception, it doesn't seem like much is happening.
It's as
But
if
in
we're a
geologic
fly.
time, yeah.
We're a fly in geology. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that's why these eruptions happen.
Okay.
Um, there are volcanoes that I was going to discuss that are basalt, mostly, and that's a different material. It's a very dark, gaseous material. Typically has a lot of viscosity and holds a little gas, but not as much as I was talking about earlier. That creates pumice. As a result, eruptions off of the basaltic lava are quiet. Lava moves slowly and builds a shield volcano.
Very cool. Really interesting stuff. I'm learning a lot about geology, that, I had no idea, and that's really interesting, and I'm thinking about this and trying to put it into context. So, you said that you were gonna talk a little bit about how that influences succession, and you also commented on how different that is depending on what activity you took. So I was curious if you could tell us, uh, from your experience and your observations and learning from some of these scientists, what what can you expect in terms of
Yes.
succession?
So with the cryptodome like Mount St. Helens, as we've been discussing, um, it's more of an explosion and less of a lava flow.
Hmm.
And the immediate effects in the area are poisonous gas, lahar, landslides, lava flows, and pyroclastic flows. And
Hmm.
so, what did this do immediately to succession? Well, it wiped out the forest. And
Hmm.
we're talking about flows here. So if you look at where this flow and all these trees, minerals, boulders, where did all of this go? It literally flew into the Toutle River and the Nisqually,
Yeah.
Nisqually River. So there were people literally fishing that day or working on rivers that day in private lands outside of the national park who their vehicles, their work crummies is a name for their work truck in logging history,
Yeah.
were literally swept and taken. And also a lot of the material that was deposited, ash, created a
Hmm.
whole different soil than what was there originally. Um, so that would be the immediate effect. And after things were cooling off and
Hmm.
dissolving, so now we have a different soil composition. Um, and we have two different plans. We have the national park who plan to let the primary succession happen.
Hmm.
And then we also have the forestry industry that was actually managing their land and doing reforestation.
Okay.
And there's quite the divide. I've
Hmm.
taken photos of this that I can put in the notes, and it's
Okay.
very interesting to see this succession from a management standpoint and also from a hands-off standpoint and have it
Sure.
naturally be. The visual difference, I will say from experience, is I see tan and gray soil, and the succession is a lot slower. In the park itself, there's broadleaf trees. There are less conifers. And then
Hmm.
once we move into the boundary of the private lands, there are more conifers, and you can't really see the soil anymore because they've planted and it's grown. And it's been 1980 to um, 2020. So that's 1980 and so 4 decades
Hmm.
of growth um, in two different management styles. Um, so yeah, it's a night and day difference of being able to see conifers versus the land, and it's so vast still to this day in the
Hmm.
national park. It hasn't come back the way that you would originally think. And there are less trees in the national park because they did not reforest.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and also a really good indication of how different objectives can drive succession in very different ways. So with the industry, their objective was to reforest their product, which I am gathering from you was a conifer species, whereas that's not what is colonizing, at least immediately, in the other area where they have more of an ecological focus to allow ecological processes to play out.
Yes, and the colonization mostly is alder
Yeah.
for natural colonization.
Okay. Very interesting. So, in terms of other parts of the community, are there other differences that you're seeing in succession? I mean, it could be plants or other organisms, I guess, even that are responding differently based on those objectives.
Yeah, so Washington State still has preserved prairie.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also known as something that we studied at that time. I've been studying for 5 years and researching Mima mounds. It's a phenomena in North Thurston County, I would say north of Mount St. Helens in
Mm-hmm.
Thurston County, close to this eruption site, where it's literally mounds, and there's so many different takes on how these mounds are created. And you can look this up. You can look up Mima Mounds Heritage Preserve on Google and see this from Google. There's been speculation of it just being gophers creating these mounds,
Mm-hmm.
but they are so succinct that if you think about ecology and eruptive processes or flows like we've been talking about, it seems like these mounds were created in an ecological process,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still speculated and still being researched today. So some other things that I wanted to talk about in prairie are the wildflowers.
Mm-hmm.
I have some gorgeous photos I can also put in the show notes that are Indian paintbrush is coming back.
Mm-hmm. I'm
We
familiar with that
also,
one.
yeah, we also have photos of Rufous hummingbirds
Mm-hmm.
coming in to the select few conifers that are on Mount St. Helens that are presumably, I would think, from seedlings that have come from birds that have drifted
Mm-hmm.
into the national park from the conifers on the private lands.
Mm-hmm.
And so you also get the berry species. There are evergreen berries and blackberries, blueberries, and that kind of thing has come back. And so, although it may seem desolate from the wide lens, when you start
Mm-hmm.
going in with a macro lens, you're going to see a lot of prairie species regenerating by
Yeah.
themselves, just naturally.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's always amazing to me to see nature respond to something that most people would view as a catastrophe, and it certainly was in many ways. But from nature's standpoint, it's a natural process that plays out, and it's really cool to watch nature respond.
Absolutely. And I've been excited to experience it for 3 decades and um, just see from researchers like Charlie Crisafulli, who we went out with in
Hmm.
May of 2012. We got to learn from his perspective because he studied Mount St. Helens before the eruption,
Hmm.
during the eruption, and after the eruption. So really, he understands the succession better than I do, and so
Hmm.
it was a great lab day and field day. And there's some pictures of that too in the notes because I just
Hmm.
had a great time. And he's actually been in a movie. And the US Forest Service ecology program has been expanding, and Charlie has been involved in that. And I'm really happy that those resources are going to be available
Hmm.
in movie and audio. And then How Ecology Works, your podcast.
Hmm.
This is really important work. So I'm glad to be a
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, well, we're really glad to have you, and I appreciate you coming on. And for those out there listening, we'll try to provide you with links and some of these things, that these resources that we're talking about. But thank you very much for that. That was really eye opening. I didn't realize a lot of the things that were going on with it. I knew it was a really interesting example, but not much more. So I was glad to learn from you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to spread the knowledge and the wealth of natural ecology processes. And it's been really fun. So thank you.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening in. And again, if you want more information, just check in the show notes. We should have all those links there for you. Thanks for listening to How Ecology Works. If you're interested in more topics like this, follow us at ufdeerlab.